Hey folks, this is Kelani. By this point you've probably hopped into the new raid, the Crucible of Storms, and if you haven't yet, well why not? Normal and Heroic opened up last week with Mythic and Raid Finder opening up this week, so it's all available. Mythic seems to be a huge step up from the Battle of Dazar'alor. I've been watching a few streams try to crack the first boss open, and it doesn't seem like it wants to budge. I think at this point only 2 guilds have killed it, but if you're only interested in seeing the raid for the story side of things, Raid Finder shouldn't be too bad. One of the cool things about the Crucible of Storms is the super effects on pretty much every single item. No matter what piece of gear you get from the new raid, chances are it does something a little extra. Whether that's providing you with a little shield, dealing a little bit of damage, or ripping open a void fissure beneath your feet. There's some interesting effects to play around with. I'm happy to announce that those effects don't seem to be a one-time deal. There's quite a few quirky things going on in some of the loot from the new dungeon in patch 8.2, Operation Mechagon, and even the new raid down in Nazjatar. One of the items that has a pretty crazy special effect is the new trinket from the Mechagon zone. The pocket-sized computational device allows you to rewire your character's brain with a variety of punch cards. These punch cards are kind of like gems, except you can only slot the correct colour punch card into the matching colour on the trinket. So you'll have to find a red punch card, a yellow punch card, and a blue punch card to get the most out of your trinket. Each card colour has different effects, and there are so many of these cards available which just adds up to a very customizable trinket. The trinket itself is given to you in the Mechagon zone maybe 5 minutes after you get there. Seriously, it's one of the first quests you obtain in the new zone on the PTR right now, so it's not like this thing is hidden away anywhere or anything like that. It's super easy to get your hands on. The punch cards, on the other hand, will require a bit of digging. So what does each card do? The red cards provide you with an on-use or equip effect which follows the usual layout of a trinket. Deal extra damage when the effect procs, or do something special if you're below 50% health. That's where the interesting procs and effects will probably come from. The yellow punch card offers a variety of static stat options, so you can have crit and haste, or haste and crit, or haste and versatility. I think pretty much every combinations of stats that you could ask for is covered with the yellow punch cards. Some of them will come from quests, some might be tied to rep, but there's a whole boatload from the dungeon Operation Mechagon. Those two cards together make up the majority of your trinkets, some stats and a special effect. But there's one last slot on this trinket, the blue punch card slot. Blue cards seem to be for fun little extras, like being more resistant to movement forces like knockbacks, or tracking nearby mechanical units on your minimap. There's even one which acts as a permanent neural silencer, so not the most powerful effects, but they should still prove to be useful in one way or another. I think it's going to be super interesting being able to build a trinket exactly how you want it, and it's also something that can be upgraded, recreated, and kept up to date as the patch unfolds. I think this could be really cool. But that's not the only unique item or effect coming in patch 8.2, there's also the new logic loops and bit bands. Anyone who has played around with programming or coding briefly should know about if-then loops. Well, Blizzard decided to make a whole set of rings follow this very simple algorithm. Logic loops will give you an if statement, and bit bands will give you a then follow-up. The idea is that you can combine any logic loop with any bit band to create your very own personalized set of rings. For example, if you damage an enemy while you are behind them, then you deal extra nature damage to a nearby enemy. That one is fairly straightforward and might seem like an obvious choice. But what about if you use 3 different spells on the same target, heal all allies for a little bit of health? Combining these rings in a variety of ways could make for some very interesting results, and some which allow you to fill parts of a role that you're not fully intended to fill. You could have any number of DPS off healing constantly, or tanks helping out with the off-healing, or healers triggering large DPS effects. There's also an effect to absorb magic damage. Can you imagine having key members of your raid all equip that effect on a fight with constant magic damage? There's so much potential here for thinking outside of the box, especially if they introduce more variants of these rings. I think it's really exciting that they're giving us the wheel for once. I just hope they don't try to turn the car around when we try to drive somewhere they didn't intend for us to go. I think the most fun always comes from giving us the building blocks, but allowing us to piece them together however we want. Nerfing or changing things to direct us down a path the dev team want us to go will only ever stifle fun and enjoyment, and agency and choice at the end of the day, so I hope they let us go crazy this time around. With the super cool stuff out of the way, we also get some effects more like the ones found in the Crucible of Storms raid. Before you get too worried, it's worth pointing out that not every item from the new dungeon has special effects. There's lots of boring items with the standard secondary stats to choose from as well. The Neural Synapse Enhancer is an intellect staff with an on-use effect of zapping yourself to gain about 1000 intellect for 15 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. That's actually very powerful, with a very high uptime as well. That little buff should be available for pretty much any DPS cooldown you can have as a caster DPS, so I guess we'll all be going after it until we get an item level 500 Mega Titan Forge with a socket. The Reclaimed Shock Coil is an agility staff. This one has a chance to shock your targets whenever you crit, so adding just a little bit of extra damage on top of what you're usually doing. This might have some interesting potential with the Heart of Azeroth essences that revolve around crit, and if your class loves crit, well, that just makes it a wonderful crit pie, doesn't it? Bear in mind that any numbers tuning probably hasn't been done yet, as hitting for an extra 80 doesn't really seem finished now, does it? Unless they just want us to tickle Ajara to death. The Fusion Hacker and the Salvaged Incendiary Tool are both blowtorches that are masquerading as axes, and they both have the same effect. Chance on hit to set your enemies on fire, dealing extra damage over time. Sounds like a fairly reasonable effect when you're playing with a blowtorch, doesn't it? Mountback's Colourful Cloak gives you another Hearthstone effect with a bit of Dungeons & Dragons flair. Once per long rest, you can return to your designated innkeeper. Not all too useful in the grand scheme of things, though having access to another Hearthstone cooldown isn't all too bad either, but it's some nice flavour for sure. The Trashmaster's Mantle allows you to don the mantle of the Trashmaster, which seems fairly straightforward really. It's his cloak after all, but I'm wondering if this will have some special interaction within the dungeon itself. I sincerely hope so. The Anodized Deflectors give you a 1 minute cooldown which increases your parry and avoidance for 6 seconds, and after those 6 seconds are up, you deal some extra damage in a cone in front of you. That one should be useful for the plate tanks out there. The gold-coated superconductors give you a teeny buff to every secondary stat whenever you take nature damage, so I guess go find the nearest source of nature damage and dip your toe in every minute or so. I could see this causing a few issues in some raids if the nature damage that you're going into nearly kills you, but the healers will just have to deal with that, right? The Hyperthread Wrist Wraps reduce the remaining cooldown of your 3 most recently cast spells by 5 seconds, on a 2 minute cooldown. They couldn't make this too powerful now, could they? I'm sure that's why it doesn't appear to be too useful right off the bat, but honestly that's a really cool effect with a wide variety of uses. It might not be a huge DPS upgrade, but at least you can set up your spells, push the button and know you'll get some spells back a little faster, and they're spells of your choosing. The Wraps of Electrostatic Potential lets you zap your foes with nature damage over 8 seconds, but only if you stay within range. That's on a minute cooldown, and I wonder what the required range is. That could require you to stay quite close, which might not end too well for you depending on the boss you decide to tether yourself to, but just having another button to push every minute or so is kind of fun too. And the last item we have from the dungeon with a special effect is the Greaves of Acid Resistance. These gives you a chance to ignore 50% of the damage you take from ooze and slime creatures, and I think there might actually be one of those in the new raid, so that could save a few lives, you never know. There is actually a pair of items from the new raid that currently have a special effect too, so it's not all in the dungeon. Let's have a little peek at those. The Chimeric Boltcaster is a crossbow which gives your attacks a high chance to apply a Toxic Brand, which deals damage over time. It has a secondary effect though. If you apply Toxic Brand to a target with Frostmark, you deal some extra damage. That Frostmark comes from a different weapon in the raid, the Chimeric Stinger. This is an agility polearm and it does the same kind of thing, except the polearm Polearm applies Frostmark instead of Toxic Brand. If you have players in your raid with each item, they could potentially get quite a bit of extra damage out of these shiny weapons, but they're only going to be available to a select few classes. Not many people can use an Agility Polearm, and only one class can really make use of a crossbow, so I guess hunters are going to want these crossbows even if they do look a little shoddy. So plenty of special effects in the new dungeon, a pair of effects from the new raid, some new set types being played around with in the Logic Loop and Bitband ring sets, and a build your own trinket. We're definitely heading in an interesting direction, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Bear in mind this is still PTR footage, so everything is subject to change. We might see some of these not make it to live servers, or we could have plenty more in the pipeline just waiting to get onto the public test realms. What do you think of more unique effects being available on gear? What about the new Logic Loop and Bitband ring sets that allow you to chop and change a set bonus? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.